Welcome to the Visions of War podcast series.
Presented by me, Bob Carruthers. I'm honoured to have been making military history documentaries for the past 30 years, and in that time I'm proud to have won an Emmy Award. But more importantly, I've also discovered and shared some great primary source material concerning the history of warfare.
The Visions of War podcast is brought to you with a huge array of informative insights and discussions
Covering every aspect of military history.
You'll find Visions of War wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm sure you won't be disappointed.
Today we're tackling something really essential, maybe a bit sobering. We're doing a deep dive into the actual source material, the memoirs, the personal accounts of the men who served in Hitler's army during World War II.
Yeah, we're trying to get past the big generalizations.
Exactly. We want to understand the experiences of these German veterans. You know, their path from the euphoria of the early Blitzkrieg wins right down to the final awful ruin of the war.
Our mission here really is to boil down the core knowledge from these accounts. And they're diverse, sometimes they conflict, and often they're pretty horrific.
Mm-hmm.
We need to focus on what led these young men individually into the Wehrmacht. And crucially, you have to look at the difference between, say, political ideology and that really ingrained, often fatal sense of just military duty.
And what jumps out right away when you look at these sources is that the reasons they joined weren't all the same. It wasn't monolithic. Not everyone was some, hardcore Nazi ideologue.
Yeah.
You have guys like Detlef Radbruch in the Luftwaffe of the Air Force, whose families were actually against the regime.
Right.
But he still felt that in wartime, well, you had to do your duty. It sort of suggests that for a lot of them, service was about national commitment, not necessarily political belief.
That's a really key distinction, and the paths into the service were incredibly varied. For some, it was just a family legacy. Simple as that.
Like the Navy guy.
Exactly, Heinz Reiners. He joined the Kriegsmarine, the Navy, because his father had served in the German Navy back in World War I. It was, family tradition.
And then for others, especially the younger ones, the military was kind of just the next step. It was everything they'd ever known.
Precisely. Take Karl Born, a Luftwaffe volunteer. He'd been flying gliders since he was 13. So joining the Air Force, it was just a logical step from his training.
Just kept going.
Yeah. And then you've got figures like Wolfgang Reinhardt. He was in the Young Volk. Then the Hitler Youth. Basically from age 6, he knew little else. So for him, war wasn't some huge shift. It was almost an extension of how he'd been brought up, that peacetime indoctrination.
So you've got duty, you've got this momentum carrying them forward. And then the training itself must have really hammered home this idea of superiority.
Absolutely. The accounts from the elite training centers, like the NCO school, Potsdam Reich, they talk about training designed purely to create these unstoppable soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
They were using live rounds and shells in practice attacks on bunkers. I mean, this environment was incredibly tough, dangerous, and it was meant to build this sense of being invulnerable, superior to any enemy.
Which feeds right into the political reasons given for the war, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially for those who bought into the national story, this idea that war was needed to fix the great injustice after World War I.
That's right. And that injustice was the Treaty of Versailles, 1919. For these men, that treaty was a massive source of national shame, losing territory, crippling payments, taking all the blame for the last war. Guys like the famous Luftwaffe ace Haja Hermann, they genuinely believed Germany had to act. They had to rescue German exiles in places like Poland.
So it wasn't just propaganda. For some, it was deeply felt.
Hermann felt that if they just accepted Versailles, they would have been the worst idiots ever. It was this real desire to get Germany's pride back that, well, it fueled that early war machine.
And that machine, when it got going in 1939, used a kind of fighting the world just hadn't seen before.
Let's unpack that initial shockwave. The Blitzkrieg. We think tanks, armor. But what did it actually feel like?
Oh, the Blitzkrieg. It was destructive, yes, but also terrifyingly fast. The true lightning war. It was all about coordinating armor and aircraft. But crucially, it was psychological.
How so?
Well, veteran accounts really stresses the old way, cautious artillery barrages first, that was gone. Replaced by swift, crushing air attacks designed to break morale instantly.
And the Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber was central to that, wasn't it? Correct. The Stuka, with that horrifying whining siren, it caused panic, Total confusion on the ground even before the bombs hit. It was built to shatter the enemy's will right away, clearing the path for the ground troops.
But how do you square that?
Yeah.
You've got the fervent political belief from guys like Hajo Herman, who felt the Poles had betrayed Germany, deserved what they got. And then you have other soldiers on the front line seeing things more humanely.
Yeah, that's the conflict you see right there in the source material. Herman's intense political view is really different from someone like Hans Lehmann, who was right there with the invasion troops.
What did Lehman say?
Well, his view was much less vicious. He said the Poles were human beings. He said, not that I loved them, but I didn't feel that I had to exterminate them.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests that maybe the propaganda got them ready for war, but the actual experience day to day and how long they were exposed to it, that maybe shaped how brutal they became or didn't become.
And the speed of those early wins. It was almost absurdly efficient. You mentioned Hans Lehmann's unit nearly getting court-martialed.
Yeah, it's a great little story. It shows the sheer chaos of winning so fast. Lehmann's unit took Polish prisoners back to Danzig. By the time they got back to the front, the campaign was basically over.
They couldn't find their unit?
Couldn't catch up. It had advanced too quickly. So they get back to headquarters, and they're threatened with being charged as deserters.
Incredible.
Classic military thinking, right? Punished for winning too well.
So if the Blitzkrieg was all about speed and open space, the U-boat service was the total opposite. A war fought in tight, claustrophobic spaces, deep underwater. This was considered an elite service, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The U-boat crews were definitely seen as an elite, often volunteers, very strict health checks, but the actual environment, miserable. It was a sneaky, clandestine kind of war, totally dependent on surprise.
The descriptions from the veterans sound just horrific. Hans Lange called his boat a stalagmite cave.
Yeah, because they were very wet, just constant dampness everywhere. You couldn't dry your clothes. They just sort of dried out on us while you were wearing them. But interestingly, despite the damp, the food rations were actually good. Status 1 rations, apparently better than what people got back on the mainland.
Really?
Yeah, but there was a catch. The cook, Rudolf Gutmann, remembered that absolutely everything tasted of gasoline.
Why?
Because they had to store provisions absolutely everywhere, crammed between metal girders, anywhere they could fit them. So everything just absorbed the fumes.
It's fascinating, too, how this sort of ethics of that service changed over time. Early on, there seems to have been this almost old-fashioned naval chivalry.
Yes, that comes through. Werner Ziemer talked about how early U-boat commanders would actually board a merchant ship, check its papers for contraband, then give the enemy crew food and water, sometimes even tow their lifeboats closer to land before sinking the ship.
Like rules of engagement from another era.
Exactly, and adherence to older military codes.
But as you said, the sources are clear. That humanitarian way of fighting did not last. As the war got tougher, that sense of honor just evaporated.
It eroded rapidly, and that connects straight back to the sheer psychological pressure cooker they were in. Heinz Reiners noted that later in the war, if they surfaced and saw enemy sailors in the water, sometimes they were machine gunned.
Just brutal.
The pure mechanics of that kind of warfare, the fear, the confinement, the constant threat of depth charges, retaliation, it just ground down any ingrained sense of military honor for some.
And the terror of depth charge attacks. I mean, the noise alone, the radio operator having to rip his headphones off instantly so his eardrums wouldn't burst.
Immense pressure. Rudolf Gutmann described an 8-hour depth charge attack off Greenland. 8 hours. He said it was so intense it welded the crew together.
I can imagine.
And this constant uncertainty, it bred a lot of superstition. Heinz Reiners mentioned they'd never say something like, oh, we'll be home in 3 days. Just too tempting fate.
Right.
That kind of tension also explains why, when they did get back to port, it was always followed by absolute blowout parties, heavy drinking, just a massive release of all that built-up psychological strain.
Okay, shifting gears now, radically. We have to turn to what became the ultimate nightmare for the German army. The Eastern Front, Operation Barbarossa. Kicks off June 1941, and it's fueled by this, well, arrogant belief in a quick win.
Completely arrogant. General Yodel's famous line, right? The Russian Colossus will be proved to be a pig's bladder. Prick it and it will burst.
Yeah, how wrong could he be?
Brutally wrong. That belief was just shattered. Because the enemy wasn't just the Red Army, it was the land itself, the geography. The sources talk about these endless stretches of tundra, swamp, rock. and the cold.
Oh, the cold.
Extreme cold, down to minus 50 degrees Celsius.
Right.
And the German high command totally failed to equip their troops for it. They'd only planned based on Central European conditions, not Arctic warfare. A massive, fatal oversight.
And the Russian way of fighting, their weaponry was terrifyingly brutal too, wasn't it?
Absolutely. German veterans talk constantly about the Stalin organ, the Katyusha rocket launcher, that roaring sound covering huge areas with continuous fire. Maybe even more terrifying was the artillery they called Ratch Boom.
Ratch Boom. Why?
It was the sound of the Russian 7.5-centimeter gun. What made it so uniquely deadly, so psychologically terrifying, was that the sound of the gun firing the Ratch and the explosion boom were almost simultaneous.
So no warning.
Zero time to react, zero time to take cover. It caused massive casualties, and that constant, inescapable threat just added to the immense psychological burden.
And then there were the snipers. Otto Bentz, a sergeant, described them as this insidious, unseen enemy. They mainly targeted officers, apparently.
Yeah, to the point where NCOs like Benz actually removed their rank badges to avoid becoming targets.
Wow.
That constant feeling of being watched, plus the relentless night bombing, even by these slow old sports planes they nicknamed coffee machines in besieged areas like the Demjansk pocket, it just ground people down. Veterans said many soldiers became nervous wrecks, and some admitted that others simply went mad.
Just unimaginable pressure. Yet even in the middle of all that savagery, you get these strange, fleeting moments of, well, humanity almost.
It's complex, isn't it? Wolfgang Reinhardt remembered this unwritten law at a sawmill where both sides were fighting. Apparently, the Germans would go get wooden posts in the morning, and the Russians would go in the afternoon.
A truce just for supplies.
A totally mutual, unspoken agreement right in the middle of a battle zone. Bizarre.
And the kindness from civilians sometimes, even to the enemy. That story about Edward Stell.
Yeah, powerful example. He remembered resting in a ditch, and an old Russian lady found him. Instead of hostility, she just gave him potatoes and thick milk. Just simple compassion that somehow transcended the whole conflict.
But those small moments, they don't diminish the overall cost, especially somewhere like Stalingrad.
No, Stalingrad really encapsulates the horror of the Eastern Front. Over 1 million Russian losses. 160,000 Germans killed. And out of all those captured, only about 6,000 ever made it back home.
And Goering's boast.
Yeah.
That was central to the disaster, wasn't
It's his hubris, yeah. Famously promised Hitler he could supply the entire encircled 6th Army by air, 550 tons of supplies a day.
A promise he couldn't keep.
Failed spectacularly. It led to the near-total destruction of the Luftwaffe's transport fleet. Russian flak, Russian fighters were just ferocious, and the resulting retreat, this catastrophic defeat, was often hidden by propaganda back home. They called it straightening out the front line.
Unbelievable. So as the war finally ends, the last phase for many of these veterans is captivity. And the sources show that experience was wildly different depending on who captured you.
Hugely different. The Americans, for instance, were often pretty inexperienced at handling POWs, especially early on. Herbert Bayer remembered when they were brought to the USA, actual locals came out just to see the Nazis.
What, like checking for horns?
Yeah, he mentioned rumors about horns and hooves. But generally, he said, they were treated okay. Curiosity more than malice.
But Russian captivity, that was a different story entirely.
Oh, completely different. Brutal. As we said, maybe 1 million German POWs died in Soviet captivity. Edmund Bonhoeffer described being forced to work in these really primitive mines. Conditions, he said, felt like something from the 19th century. And just being identified could be a death sentence.
The SS tattoos.
Exactly. The threat of being singled out as SS or even just a perceived hardliner meant some veterans went to extreme lengths. One guy apparently burned off his own blood group tattoo with a cigarette end to avoid worse treatment in the Soviet camps.
God, contrast that with the British system, though. It sounds much more organized.
Yeah, the British system was highly structured. In camps like one called Butterley, they actually categorized prisoners, anti-fascists, the sort of middle ground gray men, and then the hardliners, often U-boat crews and SS men.
But they also offered rehabilitation?
Some did, yes. Butterley, for example, had educational facilities. Klaus-Dieter Ullschlagel, who'd been a U-boat veteran, spent his 2 years in captivity studying Latin.
Latin.
Yeah, and apparently that skill was crucial for his post-war career. He became a doctor and a radiologist. So captivity, for him at least, offered an unexpected path forward.
So as these men looked back decades later, what was the feeling? What was the weight of it all?
Well, the emotional weight comes through really clearly. A deep sense of regret, mostly. A realization that they'd been caught up in something truly awful. a terrible evil, as some put it. Many felt permanently painted by it.
Even if they felt they were just doing their duty at the time.
Right, because at the time, duty was paramount. Surrendering was often unthinkable. You could be executed by your own side. But looking back, after the war, the moral picture became much clearer and much heavier.
And the overall theme seems to be one of just disillusionment, profound loss. Walter Wiesen summed it up pretty powerfully. He said the worst part wasn't even the fighting itself.
What was it?
It was the realization afterwards that nothing has been learned from what happened.
That's bleak. And that realization ties back to the cost of their stolen youth. Edmund Bonhoeff's reflection is maybe the most heartbreaking summary in all these accounts.
What did he say?
He said, "I spent my youth fighting in the war. I never had a youth. When I returned, I was an old man."
Gone. The true trauma wasn't just the physical damage or the killing, but that stolen time, a whole generation that effectively skipped young adulthood. It really leaves you thinking, if the main driver for so many was just duty, like they said, well, at what point does just following orders become a bigger moral failure than fighting for something you actually believe in, even if that belief is wrong? That's certainly something to mull over.
If you found this episode helpful, informative, or entertaining, be sure to hit follow or subscribe in your podcast app. You'll get our new episodes for free, and it tells the platform we're doing a good job. It takes 30 seconds, but leaving a review is a massive help. It's the main way new listeners find out if this show is right for them. We read every single one. Thanks from all the Visions of War podcast team.